Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. This video is to bring you a closer look at the Bommer 7814-633. This is a double-acting spring pivot with a jamb bracket, medium duty, non-hold open, steel base material for the trim plates, and a satin brass plated finish. So this is in essence the very typical and common double-acting floor pivot or spring, I suppose, from Bommer, who has been making this for several decades. Lots of imitators. One company private labels it. Another company used to make them but no longer does. Bommer has steadfastly manufactured the item for decades. So this is a very typical and common double-acting floor pivot that you could certainly find yourself looking for either yourself or for a client, because it's non-hold open and it's medium duty and it's satin brass. Okay, all very typical and common for regular residential applications. What this does have that makes it a little bit different, it makes it a 7814, is the jamb bracket. So this separates it from everything else. And we're going to go over what this is. Let's do a visual tour of the item. Then we're going to talk about some options. We're going to talk about other finishes. We're going to look at the template and installation instructions. Well, this is the business end. This is, and I should have also mentioned that this is also adjustable. So I will be quiet and let you look now. And basically the preparation for this is literally a notch in the door. It's very simple and straightforward. The first time I did one, I did it by hand. And all I did was, well, make the door look like the paperwork. That's what I did, and it fit perfectly. So very common piece of equipment that you could certainly run into. The only thing that separates it from being the most common one is just that floor plate. That floor plate mounts like that. When you have a situation where you cannot or will not drill into the floor, like you would with a standard unit, and attach it to the floor, you would attach the floor body to the plate to the jamb, is how you would do that. More visual tour, you've got the heel plate. That's going to work with your face plates as well. That is, again, made of steel. The trim on this is steel, meaning you can also get brass trim. The floor plate's still going to be steel, but the brass trim will certainly be a true satin brass finish, meaning it would be a 606 finish, not 633. 633 means satin brass on steel. 606 specifically means satin brass on brass. And it would certainly be argued that a 606 is a much more regal finish than the 633, although, you know, at 5 feet away, it's kind of hard to tell the nuance of perfect plating with hardware if you are someone who's just a homeowner and they want that door to go back closed. That's all there is to it. Now, the finish plates are packaged up like this, and they are identical. I'm only going to show you one. They're literally identical. And here's what it looks like. Okay, so your plate is going to connect or communicate or work compatibly with your finished hardware here. Okay. They, of course, have a small amount of plating on the back. Small amount of discoloration on the plating that you can see. That's atypical for Bommer. That's to be sure. Let's investigate the other one. Yeah, similar. I would like the finish to be more exquisite. Unfortunately, it's not. Unfortunately, not an uncommon occurrence. But here's what 633 looks like. Let's take a dimension on these plates just so that we can record that now. Overall length is 9 11/16 overall height of the plate, about 2 1/4. This plate has 4 holes in it. You're not going to need 4 holes to install the plates because you will have mortised away 2 of them. Or at least 1 of them. We'll look at the template. I do wish that they made handed plates, that you had only the fastener holes where you wanted it, but you can certainly understand how that would absolutely create the requirement of handing for everything. Or at least, forgive me, it wouldn't be handed, but you'd have to get 1 of each of the plates. It's a decision that Bommer has made. They just simply don't do it. And in fact, I can't think of ever when they had a handed plate like that. I do see lots of these installed over the decades, and the holes at the bottom that the screw has a hollow spot behind it, there's just nothing there. Customers have called me up and says, what do I do with these holes? I says, well, I've been barking up that tree for a long time. Super glue, cut a couple of them off the head, place it in there. If you know you're going to do that, do it in the flat first. Okay? Then let it set overnight. More hardware. Screw packages. This is going to be for your top pivot, which we're going to go over in a minute. Your fasteners for the body to the floor plate, and then the balance of the fasteners that you would need, including the finish screws for the plates. And in fact, I don't think you're really going to need anything else. I can't think of anything that you're going to use out of here except the finish plates. These large pan head screws you won't use because you're using the fasteners for the jamb bracket. Okay. Now, let's talk about the different finishes that are available from this. And because it's steel, you can certainly do this in any finish that Bommer can plate on steel, and that's practically everything. And we're going to pull that up here. The different finishes that we have, we're going to be looking at 600 for prime coat, 601 for bright black japanned, 603 for zinc plated. I'll call it the poor man's satin chrome. It's noticeably less expensive than true plated satin chrome, and will give you a silver type finish. 604 zinc dichromate. Yeah, zinc dichromate. That will be a gold tone. It will be a bit splotchy. If you're looking for something gold, okay, yeah, 604 is certainly going to be less expensive. 632 is polished brass. 633 is satin brass. 636 is satin brass plated and blackened. I am curious to know what that equates to because I do not recall. There is a link upper right hand corner called Contact Us. When that comes up, click the click the video gallery link that's there. Then scroll all the way down to the bottom and go to page 2. On that page, you're going to find, if you were to perform a find function, BHMA, you'll be able to pull up the Builders Hardware Manufacturers Association chart for finishes. 636 we were talking about, that's going to be, it's a US 7 plated satin brass blackened, bright relieved, clear coated. So it's going to be basically an antique brass that is going to have a lacquer over it. It's going to have a clear coat over it. Okay. They're going to be able to do 637, which is a plated bright bronze. If you want a bright bronze, I would order the steel version. The bronze version of that. That would look beautiful. That would be a 611 finish. After that, we have a 638, maybe. That's going to be antique brass, which what we would just simply know as antique brass. 639 is a satin bronze. 640 is oil-rubbed bronze. 643 is going to give us plated satin bronze blackened and clear-coated. An antique bronze that is clear-coated. That is going to be a very dark finish that will have a reflective surface. Not a fan of that finish, but it's quite dark. We'll see streaks of the antiquing, so to speak, process, but it does carry a clear coat, so it'll be reflective. 645, that's going to be polished nickel. 646 is satin nickel. 647 is satin nickel plated antique nickel is what that one is. 647 is antique nickel. 648 is a finish that I don't think I've ever seen. Nickel plated blackened matte relief. So it's a antique nickel with a clear coat on it. 651 is polished chrome. 652 is satin chrome. So there's lots of finishes that they can do this in. And they can do all of that pretty much on solid brass or bronze base material as well. If you want the highest quality look, go with an architectural metal and not steel. So a good way to do an overview of the 7800 series is this. There is a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up not only all of the Bommer products that we sell, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog where you can review not only all items Bommer, but if you were to scroll or do a find function on your keyboard for 7801. Now what you can do is you can take a look at the chart. Now what's very handy about that is you can see in one consolidated table the different models that will apply. The table is not very complete, it's not totally complete, but it does give you the initial information to move you in the direction of what do I want here. So the most important thing first is going to be door weight. So we are dealing with a 7814. That's like a medium size, 90-pound door, quite typical. It could be that you need a 7813 or 7814 HD. You get a door weight that's beyond that. I would certainly look at a heavier rated spring. You want to have control over the spring without it moving too quickly necessarily through your opening by having to compensate with a lot of spring tension. And actually probably not move fast would be my guess. But you'd be sure really compressing that spring over its life cycle unnecessarily. So I wouldn't stretch those limits. After knowing the door weight, I would look at the plate material. Okay, so at that point, let's just say you were going to stick with 90-pound and you wanted steel plate material. Well, you really see 4 models of that. So that's really not super helpful. That table could be better. So what you do, however, is scroll to the 7811, the 7812, 7813, and 7814. And I can tell you now, it's going to be with or without jamb bracket, hold open or non-hold open. So they should add those columns to that, and I'm probably going to make a custom table myself. So so if you're dealing with a floor plate, meaning there's no jamb bracket, just the good old regular floor plate, you're going to deal with a 7811 or you're going to deal with a 7813. Hold open or non-hold open. 7811 is hold open. 7813 is non-hold open. So at that point, you have the item that you want, is the bottom line. As I had mentioned earlier, the 7814 is available with brass. Forgive me, it is only available with steel plates for a 90-pound door. But what you could do is order the 7822, I think is going to be the part number that you want. And that will give you 7822 is going to give you jamb bracket with brass trim and hold open in both directions, or the 21. So apparently they do have a brass trim, but I'm just going to stick with the fact that it's going to be steel regardless. This plate can be bought separately if you were to search the site for 78 or maybe just Bommer jamb bracket. Let's take a look and see if that actually returns any results. And while we're waiting for the site to return those results, so we've got a good idea of what the catalog is worth. And indeed we do. If you type in 78 Bommer jamb bracket, you'll find all of those items that match jamb bracket versions, which is handy, but you're looking for just the jamb brackets themselves. That will probably be, that is, I can tell you, on page 2. And looking at the finish designations, as we recall earlier, we're dealing with 633, which means steel base. None of those jamb brackets are available in a brass base material, so it'll be steel. Anyway, catalog is handy now. Let's get to the business at hand of what a 7814 is, how you install it, how you prep it. Now, as I had said earlier, I have prepped this material myself. I remember very clearly the first time I did one. It's awfully nice to have a CNC router to do it because that's really slick. So what our next stop is on this journey is to scroll down and look at the extended description. We'll just briefly touch on that before we tackle the template and installation instructions. Iron and steel mechanism, steel trim, anti-friction bearings. That's for sure going to be buried down inside of here, where you're going to have, you know, the hinge doing all of its weight. And in fact, you can just see the bearings right there. A couple of them peek out at us. Decades of use you'll get out of that. Double acting, non-hold open. Floor bracket included. Adjustable spring tension. We'll talk about that. Door thickness from 1 3/8 to 1 3/4. Not that you can't use it on a thicker door. A thinner door is going to be a problem because this is just too big to stick on there. But a thicker door, I don't see a problem using it necessarily so that you're still in the weight range. But you really have to think about how you're going to lay out the margin between the edge of the door on the pivot side and the cased opening frame, and the same on the other side. You'll have to radius that, you know, for your door thickness. Or you're going to leave it square edge and leave a really huge margin so that door can double act on both sides. Or you'll get really creative with your jamb stock. Radiusing your jamb stock, I suppose. It could be done either way. If you have a ball bit that's 3.5-inch diameter, you can run your jamb stock over it. That'd be cool. I've actually only seen drawings of that sort of installation. I don't believe I've ever seen one. Maximum door width, 3 foot. 90-pound maximum weight. And now, let's get to the party time. Okay, so template. Let's talk about how to prep this door. The installation instructions are missing. Historically, there had been 2 documents, template and then installation instructions. This one document really does it all for you, and is not the same document number that I have. Okay, but this is the installation instructions, except that this has a prior revision date to the one that I have listed. That's an awfully old piece of paperwork. So, template. Let's go over it. What we're looking at in the upper third is really just dimensional properties of everything. You're going to need to refer to that when you start to put saw or router bit, you know, chisel to door. I would probably take that item and do a reality check on everything, make sure everything seems correct and that you have a good understanding of where this piece needs to go. I won't beleaguer any of the points of measuring the unit itself. It's all drawn there. I know that they're accurate, or at least they have been in the past. So really what we get to is the bottom 2/3, and really just the center section of that. You're going to see a cross section. You're going to see a top view of the door. Okay. Now what they're telling you is that you're going to need an 1.5 inch radius on that radius on the edge of the door. Okay. Now you don't have to radius the edge of the door. You can leave it square. You just have to increase the margin. Because this has a jamb bracket, we'll need to talk about a couple of other things. So how to radius the door. If you're going to leave it square, I would leave 1/4 inch on each side, is what I would do, between the edge of the door and the frame. Depending on your door thickness, that's going to be just fine. Okay, it's a double acting door in a house. You know, they're probably not too particular about the margins, but just know that you can really decrease those margins substantially by radiusing the door edge. Now I've radiused doors lots of times. I never did it often, but whenever we did a double acting door or a door with center hung pivots or a double acting floor closer, anything like that is going to have a radius. It's normal. first, before I get to how to radius it so that I don't forget, if you are radiusing a veneered product, be mindful that when you run your router bit over the edge of the door, you are accentuating the layers of the veneer. So if you have a 2 or a 3 ply door, you're going to see those lines vertically down the door because your quarter round bit is going to be really cutting through that and making those bands quite wide. If you're going to do something like that, it'd be really best if it was paint grade, or have a serious conversation with the client about what that will look like. Or you get into a veneer that you completely veneer wrap that door after it's machined. Your woodworking companies would certainly do it that way. Now, let's look at the radius. I would have basically a 3-inch diameter quarter round bit is what I would literally have. That's not a cheap bit at all. You'll want to justify that by using it more than once. And what I would do is I would take my 1.5 DeWalt and I would cut that center of the base out, remove the collet, cut all around so I could literally put the base back on and then fit my giant roundover bit into it. Okay. I would set that roundover bit just so that my bit is just leaving the center of the thickness of the door. And then at that point, I would get my door laid flat. I would clamp it down because you've got a lot of gyroscopic effect on that router. 1.5 is what I always used to be able to make hay with that door prep. And you've got a large bit. Okay, clamp the door down or it will move on you. Get the base set on the door and your bit's hanging off. You're going to want to pull it away just a little bit, start the machine, come back and touch and let that roller bearing get to the edge of the door and just scooch it over to the end of the door, but don't push in. And then at that point, force down on the bottom of the router base so that you're making contact with the face of the door and make a clean pass. And when you exit, exit straight off. Don't go like this or you're going to get the bottom of the door. Make one more pass. Never make more than 2. If you need to make 2, there's a problem with the door. Take the door at that point, flip it over, 2 passes again. Take the door this way, 2 passes, flip it over. So a total of 8 passes, and now you've got a really beautiful radiused edge door. It would be a bullnose if you were only radiusing one face of the door, which you would use in a single acting center hung application. And this hardware would be certainly considered center hung, absolutely. The vertical axis of pivoting is down in the center of the thickness of the door. Now, you can see the reference point of where they want you to have that radius, and that has everything to do with the top pivot. And this top pivot is certainly available as a standalone product. It might be a 78. I don't remember this part number. It would be handy for you to know it, I would think. 7890 is this part number. You can buy these separately. You don't have to use them with Bommer. I have sold these to people who have enjoyed using them in other applications that they could make work for their preparation. You could literally attach these to your door if you were prepping it all the way to the edge of the door, open your door to 90 degrees and then just fit your door down over it. Okay, you'd have to make a really weird prep in the edge, but you could have a center hung sort of application if it was doing cabinet work. Not that really anyone does that. So this is what the header portion looks like. This is what the door portion looks like. I've prepped these. What I like to do, even though it's a bit of a hassle, is I would use a 7/8 diameter Forstner bit. I would mark my 3 center lines, and I would just take my Forstner bit and zip, 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 5/32 deep. That's just a tiny amount. It's just over 1/8 of an inch. So you don't have to prep very deep. And it makes a nice, clean, flat-bottomed cut. And now you can see below the top view of the door where you're placing everything. So you see a dimension of 1.5 inches from the vertical center line, the vertical axis of pivoting, to the edge of the door. Now, if you are mortising that jamb bracket, okay, you can kick that over. So be mindful before you start to prep your vertical axis of pivoting. What are you doing with this? Are you going to mortise it flush, or are you going to surface mount it? If you're surface mounting it, you'll have a 3/8 inch gap there, in fact. So you would definitely want to bring that down to 1/4 inch, in my opinion, and mortise it the 1/8 of an inch deep required. The fact of the matter is you could really bring that margin down even less than what they're calling out for. The trouble is you're going to need to The trouble is you're going to need to mortise this deeper in the jamb, in the bottom of the jamb, than this is thick. So that would be the problem there. So you're literally going to be in the range of a 1/4 inch margin, and you know, in that sort of range, you could just leave the door square as well. But I would radius it. It does give you a much more elegant look, in my opinion. You can see the preparation of what has to happen for the rest of the top pivot. Okay, where to place it. Now, the important thing is that vertical axis of pivoting has to come all the way down to the door. All the way down to the floor as well, so that the vertical axis of pivoting here is plumb with your top pivot. So the center of this guy right here is what we're dealing with. And I can slightly turn it, but it's a bit strong of a spring for me to do by hand. In the lower left-hand corner, they're really calling out all of the dimensions that you're going to prep the door. I've done it with a hammer and chisel. I've done it with a skill saw to at least help me make some straight lines, and I've done it with a router. You're going to have to go back in and do some hand work as well. I would certainly recommend that if you're ordering the door from the factory, have the factory prep it with the assumption that they have the proper machinery to do it, and it will come out perfect. And do yourself a favor, order it reinforced. Get solid blocking there so that when you hog out, when you cut out that much of your door, that you're actually, you know, getting everything attached to some lumber. Now this is going to be attached to wood down here because you're only nipping out this 5/32 for this ear down here. But I would order it reinforced because I wouldn't want particle board falling out of that opening over time, because it's going to. I would want solid lumber, and I would order a big giant lock block or a floor pivot block for there, and then cut solid lumber would be the proper way, certainly, to do that. A door not reinforced would be considered certainly improper. They do then give you dimensions on the top pivot assembly in the center right-hand side, 7/16 radius. Sure, that's going to be 7/8 diameter. Prep it how you like. Forstner bit was a bit of a hassle, but it was nice when it was done because you really can't, you know, move very much with a Forstner bit, but they do work. Now, they do refer to in the lower right-hand corner how the one hole is not used for attachment, so that one hole is certainly going to be blank or empty unless you get a bit exotic on how to prep it. Okay. With a floor plate version, you're dealing with that sort of margin. Now, the installation instructions, the next document that's here, gives us a lot of the same information. Step 1 and Step 2 are all the same information. It's a little less complicated. Step 3 is certainly far more elegant when it comes to how to prep the bottom of the door. That groove is for this articulating, or not articulating, but this sliding post that the spring assembly is connected to. Or I should say, what keeps the spring assembly in its place, top and bottom, by going through these slots. You will need to prep for that, not very deep. I mean, maybe 1/8 of an inch. So the prep for Step 3 makes it really clear. Step 4 obviously shows the item installed. Now, what they don't really tell you is, in Step 5, attach all the hardware, get it tipped in place. You're going to bring the top of the door to the top pivot as you're sliding it in place and getting it in place. And then you're going to position it. You're going to make sure you're shimmed correctly, make sure that everything is level, obviously quite plumb. And then you're going to mark your hole for the jamb. You'll pull that door out, you'll pre-drill your holes, and then you'll attach your jamb bracket, either mortised or surface mounted. What they don't get into talking about here is what is the net height of the door. They don't talk about that at all. And every time I make one of these videos, I kind of lose myself in terms of what that dimension should best be. And it is clear to me that that undercut needs to be the dimension from the tab here down to the floor plate. So whatever it is from here to the bottom here is what you're dealing with. And then, of course, you've got an 1/8 of an inch margin at the header. I don't think the template calls out anything heavier than that. No, in fact, they call out an 1/8 of an inch. Oh, you know what? Forgive me. They do call out the undercut at 9/16. Let's do a test on that and see if that actually makes perfect sense for 9/16. I thought that they had mentioned it, or I had incorrectly discovered that they didn't. Put that, well, we'll never be able to sort that out. Assuming these two plates are basically flush with each other, yeah, 9/16 would be pretty much on the money. Maybe 5/8. I don't know that these two pieces are plumb with each other, or flush with each other. But 9/16 would be your undercut. So therefore, your door is going to be 11/16 smaller than your finished opening. Okay, that's super simple. Those top and bottom styles are certainly going to be square. You're going to want to very likely not necessarily or not find it necessary to reinforce the top rail. You'll have sufficient lumber up there, hopefully, to do a top installation without having any trouble. If you've got a residential door that's made of MDF or some such inferior substrate, it's the wrong material to use for this. It's going to work loose eventually. That's all but guaranteed. You'll start making noises too when everything starts to move. So be mindful to work with a door that's going to be properly reinforced. That covers the installation instructions, the template. You do then at the very end get your plates installed, bring your heel plate, and there is a tiny screw for the heel plate. Somewhere here. I unfortunately do not see it. I will contact the manufacturer and get a missing screw, because this is going to need to, there's a machine screw that's going to need to tidy up into this tapped hole that's here. And I do not see any machine screws beyond the 4 to get any flathead machine screws for this area here. That's unfortunate. Okay, so we've got to get a machine screw for this and get that sent off to the client. Finally, there's a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up not only all of the Bommer products that we sell, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog that we've already addressed in terms of where to find it. I'm quite partial to Bommer, and it's because see their logo right there. The Bommer logo. And right above it, it says Made in USA, a fact that Bommer is quite proud of, as am I to represent them. Any questions on the Bommer 7814 and a 633 finish, or any other Bommer product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.